Hello everyone, I'm just doing this quick video on immigration and urbanization in America, just in case you missed class this past week. Certainly a lot of the sources that are on Schoology for the small group discussions are sources to take a look at and just pay attention to some of the dates of those sources. Urbanization really does begin widely with the second industrial revolution. So we see a burst in American cities in the time period after the US Civil War. You can see the image of a bustling city in the image, and you can look at the various forms of transportation and kind of the street life and merchant activity and, the people that are standing outside their windows, to kind of get some of the fresh air. So you do get a little bit of a visual, and maybe even you can hear it a little bit, what the city might sound like. Lots of people, and it kind of speaks to the time. Cities will bustle and grow really into the 1920s. And so this time period of city growth and urbanization has a little bit of a lengthy timeline. This is another, photograph. It just kind of captures some of the people walking along the street, some of the different kinds of transportation. You see the advent of trolleys, for example, lots and lots of storefronts and also lots of street merchants. So just many, many people. To give you a statistic, by 1860, there's about 1 million people living in New York City. By 1900, it's over 3 million. So massive, massive increase in people. We see something similar in Chicago, which kind of becomes like the city of the urbanization period. And there's 100,000 people in 1860. By 1900, the city is over 1 million people. And we certainly see a couple of trends. All of these trends have something in common in terms of migration. They are all related to a push and a pull. What is it that's pulling Americans into cities? And, why are people coming to American cities? And so by 1920 in the United States, you have more people living in cities than rural areas. That had traditionally not been the case. So we see a flip-flop of the percentage of people living in urban areas. Certainly there's a lot of pulls for that: better paying jobs, entertainment, cultural experiences. So there's a variety of different things, especially jobs, that people will come for. You also have a great deal of pushes, and in some cases this might be discrimination, such as what's happening in the Jim Crow South. So we might get people from the southern part of the United States who move to cities like Philadelphia or Newark, New Jersey, or New York City. And a lot of those pushes may be varied. Certainly, immigrants are coming from other countries in a lot of cases because of economic displacement or disenfranchisement related to industrialization itself. Sometimes there's political changes. There had been a great deal of turmoil in Europe in the 1840s. So a variety of things might cause a push. Certainly for Jews, for example, in certain areas of Europe, you might get pogroms, situations of Russian Jews, for example, coming at the turn of the century, might have experienced religious intolerance. So there's a variety of reasons why people might choose to emigrate, leave their home country or country of origin, and then come to the United States. And you should note that the United States is not the only place where there's high rates of immigration. We also see Australia and Argentina and some other societies too that are taking in larger and larger numbers of especially European immigrants. There's also a lot of new forms of transportation. So migration becomes more feasible with the advent of ocean liners that are able to offer, faster transport, railroads that can take somebody, out to the Midwest. Lots and lots of farmers, and we get this sense from the populist movement that economically farmers aren't doing well at the turn of the century, the 1890s into 1900. So we know that industrialization is leading to lower prices, and perhaps the industry of farming is changing. So small family farms might be closing up shop, and people might be moving from the rural areas to the cities. In some cases, young women move from rural farms to cities. Some of that might be related to young unmarried women seeking employment, in some cases seeking adventure or opportunity or a move away from some type of isolation. And as noted before, one of the biggest migrations that's happening internally is the great migration that's happening with Black Americans from South to North. And we'll see the advent of topics like the Harlem Renaissance and things be connected to that migration. Okay. So keep in mind all of this movement and why and in what way that's developing. Okay. I don't know why this slide has some sort of challenge. It did this to me in class as well. Let's see if we can note a few other things. Oh, this is going this way. Okay, let's kind of go this way. So some of the things that we see in the urban cities is really high densities and the role of tenements. One of the sources that you read for your small groups was by Jacob Riis, who's a Danish immigrant. He writes a work called How the Other Half Lives in 1890. It's very, very popular, and it includes not only information about how immigrants live in urban New York City, but also he describes visually. So he takes a lot of photographs, with a large camera in the middle of the night, and photographs the typical American immigrant family that's living in a tenement. And he focuses some of his resources in the Five Points, which is one of the poorest areas of New York City. And he's talking about this time period, and others at the time might describe this as a slum. He describes it as an area that has really high density. The Lower East Side, for example, has 700 people per acre. So you're getting just some really conditions that are getting some attention. Jacob Riis will talk specifically about the design of the tenements and the way that they're problematic because they don't really allow for any airflow. And because so many people are living in the tenements, they become, really big germ fests where diseases like cholera or tuberculosis go through the population, really high rates of child mortality, for example. This is the work, and this is Jacob Riis. And he becomes, an activist, kind of like a social justice activist of his time. So it speaks to the way in which some people are seeking, ways to argue, what should be done and some solutions. This is one of Jacob Riis's images, and it just kind of showcases, I think, I forget the actual number of people in this photograph, but it's like, 12 or something like that. There's a couple people in the closet, and, it just speaks to some of the conditions, people living largely like several families in one room. And so that's some of the conditions that he talks about. Do have the phrasing of this old versus new immigrants. This is a phrase that has been attributed by historians. Old immigrants are really the second wave of immigration. There's been 4 waves of immigration to date, and we're probably in one right now. But of course, we see some of the political debate and legislation that is restricting immigration currently. But the very first wave of immigration is kind of in the colonial period. You have, for example, groups of Germans, something that Ben Franklin talks about. You also have in the 1830s, 1840s, and 1850s, old immigrants. These tend to come from Northern Europe. We do have some exceptions. For example, Chinese immigrants come in large numbers because of the gold rush and because of the demand for labor in the transcontinental railroad. So we do see a lot of Chinese emigration and immigration to the United States, as well as Chinese laborers traveling to places in South America, to Hawaii. There's a variety of other places that Chinese migrants go seeking work. So this is definitely a push-pull. Certain areas of China experiencing high rates of poverty at this time. And so you have a huge, movement out. And places where Chinese immigrants go. But for the most part, these old immigrants are largely Northern European, Protestant, and English speakers. The new immigrants really become the highest number of immigrants between 1880 and 1924. You see, first of all, massive increases in immigration. So something to know about this third wave of immigration is that you have incredible increases in immigration, especially in the years like 1890, 1896, into 1900. Those become really peak years, maybe even 1910 for new immigrants. Immigrants that are phrased as new immigrants tend to come from Southern and Eastern Europe. So we're talking about Poland, Italy, Russia, Greece, maybe Armenia. We see a lot of Jews come in this time period. We also see continued immigration to the West Coast into Angel Island from China and from Japan, Russia, and Mexico. So, Mexico from the border, but we see a lot of immigration also into the West Coast. In a lot of cases, these are immigrants who are seen as very, very different. The push factors might be similar: economic, religious, maybe political freedom, but we see new immigrants largely speaking languages different than English. In some cases, they are willing to work for very low wages. They may have come from agricultural societies, getting industrial jobs and willing to work for very little money. Many, including immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe, might be unskilled laborers. We might also have high rates of immigrants who are Catholic or Jewish. So we get a sense of non-Protestant, immigrants. In terms of this process of becoming American, there is a great deal of kind of two things happening. Ethnic communities continue to grow. There's a great deal of pride in ethnic communities, ethnic newspapers, ethnic plays, all kinds of resources that develop for particular groups to enable like some sort of connection to their culture of origin. And at the same time, there's a great deal of local and then ultimately federal pressure to have immigrants assimilate, whether that means assimilation in public schools, whether that means assimilation, using the language. Assimilation is kind of making immigrants more American, right? So that's something that's kind of a theme, this balancing between holding on to one's own culture as well as assimilating. And we see kind of the immigrant experience maybe being defined by some of those things. Second generation immigrants tend to be more likely to assimilate. Public schools, and they don't really develop until the early 1900s by law in most states. They're state laws. Largely, they speak, they teach in English. So that's something, there's not, additional services or things like that. So that becomes a tool for assimilation. Oftentimes, the dropout rate is not 16 years, it's much earlier. So mandatory schooling takes a while to kick off. This gives you a sense of some of the scale of immigration between 1870 and 1920. You can see, the red being Central Europe, the yellow being Eastern Europe, the green being Southern Europe, and you can see the extent where what happens to that like purplish color by 1920, it's much, much smaller. But you see in 1910, for example, Central Europe, Eastern Europe, and Southern Europe kind of dominate the immigration numbers. And it's this pattern that a lot of the immigrant restrictions are referring to. People who are looking at trying to establish, what the gene pool should look like or what characteristics Americans should have. And some of those things that, are connected to eugenics, a lot of that is a response to this increase in immigration and also change in immigration. You can check out this map. This gives you a sense of where in the United States you may have seen immigrant birth, like foreign born or children of foreign born. So you can kind of see, say, for example, in North Dakota and Minnesota, Milwaukee, for example, or Chicago, these are industrial centers where you have 50 to 75% of the population that is foreign-born or children of foreign-born, and maybe that's less the case in places like Georgia and South Carolina. And because we looked at the New South, we have a little bit of an idea of what is happening in that space. So just kind of keep that in mind. This is an image of immigrants arriving in Ellis Island. A lot of the information that historians have about immigrants comes from ship manifests, the list that ships kept. Most is third class, which is steerage. They have to go through Ellis Island. Other classes have a shortened process, but kind of keep this image